Hello all. So this is the second part of the mini lecture for this week. I'm just trying to see if this will help you understand the topics and help you out when you're working them out. I'm just going to go a quick overview of them, not more than 10-15 minutes. And so after that, you just watch whatever you think you need help with. And if there's anything else that you need help, just let me know. And I can probably create a video or do something that could help you and your classmates. So let's just start. This mini video is the second part of this week's topic. So what we have is going to be solving quadratic equations, and we're going to do it either by factoring, square root method, or quadratic formula. For the factoring, I created a mini really fast review for factoring. If you want to watch it, that's optional but highly recommended. And for the quadratic formula, I put the video of the song in case you want to listen to it and learn it. It would be a good idea. And then the other thing that we're going to be talking about is distance formula and midpoint formula. So let's just get this party started. So when we talk about quadratic formula, we're talking about a quadratic equation. We're talking about an equation that is of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a cannot be equal 0 and a, b, and c are real numbers. So that's what it is. Like I mentioned, there are different ways to solve this kind of equation, and we're going to just see 3 of them today in this video, and probably in your notes for this week. So let's just start with by factoring. So let's say that we have something like x squared plus 6x is equal to 0. So when we solve by factoring, we always want to make sure that one of the sides are equal to 0, which in this case we have. So we're going to factor by getting the greatest common factor, which in this case is x, and we end up with x plus 6 equals 0. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is something that is called the zero property. So the zero property just says that if you are multiplying two numbers and they're equal to 0, then what you have is that either a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. So the same thing is going to happen here. So we're going to either have that x is equal to 0 or x plus 6 is equal to 0. X equal to 0, we cannot go farther than that, so we are done. And then for the other one, we just need to solve that equation. So we have that x is equal to negative 6 when we subtract 6 from both sides. And that's how you solve that by factoring. The other method we can use to do this right here, another example for factoring would be, let's say that we have 2x squared is equal to x plus 3. So if we work this out, you notice that we cannot use the zero property because one of the sides is not equal to 0, so we need to make it equal to 0. So let's just pass everything to left hand side. And when we do, this becomes 2x squared minus x minus 3 equals 0. And then we're going to factor this out. So I'm just going to do it on the side right here. So we have two numbers that multiply gives me negative 6. But added gives me negative 1. I look for the factors of 6. And so I have that it's either negative 6 and 1 or negative 3 and 2. So it's got to be this guy. So it's going to be negative 3 and 2. So I'm going to rewrite this middle term using negative 3 and 2. So this becomes 2x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Again, this way of factoring is in the little review that I made on factoring. And then we're going to do the grouping. So the first two and the last two, what they have in common is going to be an x. So we have 2x minus 3. And then on the other one, what they have in common, you might think is nothing, but they actually do have something in common, which is going to be 1. And so we write plus 1. Don't forget that plus sign. And then you have 2x minus 3 equals 0. So now you're going to take what they have in common here, and then they have 2x minus 3, and you have left an x plus 1 equals 0. So now that everything is factored out, we are free to use the zero property. Again, that is a times b is equal to 0. Then that means that either a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. So when we have this, we have either 2x minus 3 is equal to 0, or x plus 1 is equal to 0. Therefore, we have that 2x is equal to 3, x is equal to 3/2, or x is equal to -1. So that's factoring by solving a quadratic equation by factoring. So now let's just look at the square root method. So when we look at the square root method, it's like if you have x squared is equal to p. This is an example. Then if you want to get rid of the square, remember how I told you there's an inverse function for it, which is the square root. So we just put it here, but this time we gotta be careful. We put that plus or minus. And the reason being because, let's just do it here on the side. If I do square root of p square, that's going to give me p. And if I do square root of -p square, it's also going to give me p. So that's why we need to always put that plus or minus. It's very important that we put it there. So let's say that we have, and I'm just going to bring up a quick example. Let's say that we have x squared is equal to 5, and we want to solve that. Then what we're going to do is that we're just going to look for the square root for those things. And so when we look for the square root on both sides, we're going to make sure that we remember to put the plus or minus. So we have that x is equal to plus or minus square root of 5. So that's how we solve this equation. The other equation that we're going to have in here, the other example that I'm going to bring for you, it's going to be if we have x minus 2 squared equals 16. Again, we're using the square root method. So when we do, we're going to use the inverse property for that one, the inverse function, which is the square root. Always remembering that since that guy is squared, we need to use plus or minus. So we have x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus square root of 16. But what is the square root of 16? The square root of 16 is going to be 4. So this reduces to x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 4. Now that we have this, we have two different equations. Either x minus 2 is equal to positive 4, or x minus 2 is equal to negative 4. And we're going to solve these two equations. Once we do, we have in here that x is equal to 6, or that x is equal to negative 2. And if we go back to the problem and we check, it should be good. And so this is using the square root method. The other method that we're going to be discussing, and I told you I put a video in the page for you to watch, is with the song, is the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula just says that x is equal to, I won't sing it for you, so I'll spare you of that, b squared minus plus or minus square root of, oh sorry, I made something, let me just fix it. So I have negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So just like before, remember that a cannot be 0, and we're going to use this when we have it in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Something that you want to remember when you do this thing is that those cannot be fractions. And my personal, what I like is that a be positive, because it makes things easier. So let's just make a quick example using the quadratic formula. So let's say that you have 3x squared minus 5x equals negative 1. So if I look at this, I cannot use the quadratic formula because it's not equal to 0. So that means that I need to move this negative 1 to the other side. And once I do that, it will be equal to 0, and then we can use the quadratic formula. So I have 3x squared minus 5x plus 1 equals 0. And so after this, what we have, we just set up the quadratic formula, and it's going to be x is going to be equal to negative something plus or minus square root of something squared minus 4 times something something all over 2 something. So let's identify before I keep going what is A, what is B, what is C. So A is going to be 3, which is the one that is with this square. B is going to be -5, and C is going to be 1. So now let's just plug it in. So it was minus B, and we already saw that B was -5. And then B squared, which is -5. A is 3, C is 1, and A is 3. And so let's just simplify this out. So negative times a negative is a positive. So we have that this is the same as having 5 plus or minus square root of 25 minus 12 all over 6. So then this becomes 5 plus or minus square root of 13 all over 6. And we are done. And so that's an example of how we do the quadratic formula. Last but not least, and hopefully I will have time to finish it, is the distance formula, which is if you have 2 points, let's say that you have 2 points, x1, y1, and x2, y2, then if you want to find the distance for those 2 points, it's just going to be the square root of x2 minus x1 square plus y2 minus y1 square. So if we look at a quick example, let's say that we have these points right here, that we have the point -4, 5, and 3, 2. If we have those 2 points, then if we identify this at my point 1 and my point 2, then that means that x1 is going to be equal to -4, x2 is going to be equal to 3, y1 is going to be equal to 5, y2 is going to be equal to 2. So let's just put it in the formula that we just saw. And so we're going to say the distance for those things are going to be equal to something, and then we have a minus square plus something here square. And so it's going to be x2, which in our case is 3, x1, which is -4, y2, which is 2, and y1, which is 5. And so when we do this thing, we have this is the square root of 7 squared plus -3 squared. So this is the same thing as having square root of 49 plus 9, which is equal to the square root of 58. So the distance between these 2 points is the square root of 58. And last but not least, it's going to be the midpoint. And the midpoint formula is just going to be the average of the points. So again, you have 2 points. And so you're going to do the average of the x's for the first coordinate and the average of the y's for the second coordinate. So you have y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So let's do exactly the same thing with the points that I gave you previously. And so we had the point -4, 5, and 3, 2. So I'm going to say, well, x1 is going to be -4, x2 is going to be 3, y1 is going to be 5, y2 is going to be 2. So then this becomes let's just put it there. My x1 is going to be -4, my x2 is going to be 3, my y1 is going to be 5, my y2 is going to be 2. So then this becomes, alright, I moved them a little bit. So then this is going to become -1, half, and 7/2. So that's the midpoint between those 2 points. Hopefully this will help you do the problems for this week. Thank you and have a great week.